Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. I'm Dave Marchick. I'm the interim president of American University, and this is our fourth summer book event. The first three were spectacular. All three were with best-selling authors, and we have another book which we're going to feature, which will also become a bestseller when it's on the shelves and in Amazon and elsewhere in 2 weeks when it's out. So today we're going to focus on the intersection of leadership, sports, investment, and how they relate to each other. And we have really spectacular folks to talk about this today. So starting with someone that I think all of you have probably heard of or watched, maybe the Red Sox fans. We'll put subtitles on so you can understand everything we're saying, because some Red Sox fans may not love Alex Rodriguez, but Alex Rodriguez is one of the best players in the history of the sport. 600 home runs, 2,000 RBIs. He's won every award, World Series. And he also has made a successful transition from being a player to a business leader. He's founder and CEO of A-Rod Corp, which has grown into a diversified platform of real estate, sports, media, venture capital. He's co-owner of the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Lynx. He has a venture capital firm, and along with Jason Kelly, he's the co-creator of The Deal on Bloomberg, where he and Jason Kelly explore this nexus between sports, entertainment, and investing. Jason Kelly is also with us. He brings a journalist's rigor and a storyteller's perspective to that same intersection. David Rubenstein and I have known Jason for many years because he spent more than 2 decades at Bloomberg, where he had a number of important jobs, including New York bureau chief, executive editor of Bloomberg Television, host of Bloomberg Business Week television and radio shows. And he's the co-creator and host of multiple series, including The Deal with Alex Rodriguez. He's the author of several books, including The New Tycoons and Sweat Equity. And you'll see him, he has a new bookshelf because he's working in a new office on a new project, collaborating with the founders of KKR on a book about that firm and the private equity industry. David Rubenstein, who is the author and person who will be interviewed today, is really a Renaissance person. He's one of the most influential investors in the world. He is one of the leading civic leaders in the country, and he's written 8 books. I don't know how he has time for it. He co-founded the Carlyle Group. He's the principal owner of the Baltimore Orioles. They made a big trade today, which you'll be reading about. And he brings unparalleled access to the world of sports ownership. So I have the book. I read it over the weekend. It's amazing. It'll be on shelves shortly. And he both talks about sports from his own personal perspective, growing up as a Baltimore, loving baseball, but also he talks to some of the leading sports owners, from Robert Kraft to Ted Leonsis, about what it takes to finance, build, and lead a championship organization. So Jason and Alex are going to interview David. We will also take questions from all of you. If you have questions, please text them using the chat feature, and I'll come back on in about 30 or 40 minutes and ask those questions. So thank you for joining, and I'm going to turn this over to Jason Kelly and Alex Rodriguez.
All right. Well, Dave, thank you so much. It is great to be here. It's great to be here with my partner Alex and David Rubenstein, who I've known for many, many years. He taught me a lot about the private equity industry when I was just coming onto the beat, and have admired him from afar. And now, I mean, Alex, he's our colleague at Bloomberg. We're just some guys just making shows for Bloomberg. Trying to do our best to help Mike Bloomberg be even more successful. Speaking of Baltimore. So our show is The Deal. Obviously, David has a whole portfolio of shows. He's been on our show, The Deal, and we enjoyed that conversation. So this is a great update in a way. And I also read the book. It's amazing. David, it gives really your perspective and then shows off your skills as an interviewer. I guess I would start. I'll take the prerogative and start by asking you why you decided to write this particular book, what you saw that made you think I'm learning something and I want to share it with people.
Well, many people wondered why in my mid 70s, went back to my hometown and bought a baseball team. And, I thought I would try to explain it. And I also thought that since over the years, I've gotten to know a number of owners because many of them are in the business world as well. I thought I could try to do the interviewing that I've often done in other books. So I thought I would be trying to combine my own reason for wanting to buy a sports team and why other people wanted to buy a sports team. And I try to do it with some humor and some self-deprecating remarks about myself.
So, David, go ahead, Jace.
Well, I was going to say, Alex, you see a lot of, I mean, what's fun, what you and I were talking about this a little bit earlier, you see you and David come from different angles, different worlds, but I know because we talked about it at the time. You were very intrigued when David Rubenstein, your private equity idol, came into the business of baseball, right?
Yeah, and David knows I've studied his career for decades, and really, we have a common friend, Ed Mathias, who's a great mentor of mine, and the way that David built that firm with his partners is really second to none as one of the top tier firms in the world. And when he takes his talents to baseball, at the early age of in his early 70s, is intriguing. But I know that is also a social duty that he feels. He's already done so much philanthropic with the tower and all the monuments he's done in Washington, D.C., and now he's moving over to Baltimore to bring more good fortune. He's brought great partners, and I'm really intrigued with his partner, also with Mike Arrighetti, who's a great partner. And I think his baseball's better because of these two partners coming into baseball.
Well, I don't know where I'm. I don't know if baseball is better because of our coming in, but I appreciate your kind words. But look, Alex, you did a better sports deal than virtually anybody I've seen because you bought a team that was worth a lot more than you paid for it, and that was a great deal. So the Timberwolves are pretty lucky to have you as an owner. I regret the fact that my own firm couldn't get into the deal because of a conflict of interest that the NBA somehow found. But anyway, it's a great deal for you. Thank congratulations.
Yeah, and Harvey and your team were actually incredible to work with. Mark was also fantastic, who works very closely with Harvey, and you move on to the next one. But I do have a question for you. I mean, you interviewed some of the most successful owners in this book, and my question is, a lot of these are mentors of mine. But what was the biggest lesson that you took away as you think about bringing those practices to ownership of the Orioles?
Right. Well, the interesting thing I think I got from all the interviews was that um, owning a sports team is not the single best way one can spend their time to make money. Many people do make money, and eventually, people generally are happy with owning sports teams. They don't intend to lose money. But the sports owners that I interviewed, and I think all the ones that I know that I didn't interview, they're more driven by winning than they are by making a certain amount of money. Winning a championship, doing something for your native, or your hometown, or the team that you represent is just something that gives them a greater thrill. And the amazing thing as well about it is that, like in Carlyle's case or KKR's case or Blackstone's case, the companies that many of us buy are much, much bigger in terms of revenue than these sports teams. But the sports teams get an enormous amount of attention. So, Carlyle can buy a company that has $1 billion or $2 billion of revenue and nobody even pays attention to it. Now we have a baseball team that might have $100 million of revenue. All of a sudden, everybody's talking about it.
Hmm.
And like today was the trade deadline for Major League Baseball. It ends in about 50 minutes, and you know, I'm getting emails from people from all over the country talking about trades we made, as if you think they have nothing else to think about. But people are obsessed with the trades we've made and trades other teams have made. So it's amazing how much interest people have in sports, and I think it's increased in recent years as there are many more sports teams. When I was growing up, there were relatively fewer sports teams than there are today. But because of expansion, you have it probably about 2.5 times as many major league sports teams as you had when I was a boy in Baltimore.
Jason, I got to give you this one real quick just to follow up on David's comments. I recently had a good friend of mine who has tried to buy several sports teams and he's missed and he's regretted it. And then he called me the other day. He goes, man, you got it all right. You got these teams, you get so much attention. I make all the money, you get the attention. I want in. I go, no, no. That's actually the worst part of being an owner, the attention. You got it all wrong. He goes, no, I want the attention.
Well,
Alex,
if you
go
pay
ahead.
attention to the tweeting online and so forth, you can drive yourself crazy because the fans are generally going to say more negative things than positive things as a general rule of thumb.
I mean, I love the idea that someone is coming to you, Alex, and being like, "I really want attention," and you're like, "Bro, let me tell you a little bit about attention and what that feels like." Over the course of a career, in all forms, and fashions. So on that point, David Rubenstein, how how surprised were you? Because I think you must have been a little bit surprised at how much was focused on you. I mean, you suddenly went, I mean, you were a well-known guy in certain circles. Now, I can't imagine you can walk down the street in Baltimore without someone saying something nice or maybe not so nice.
It is amazing if you go to a baseball game or the Orioles game or in Baltimore, people come up and they want selfies and they want autographs. And I keep saying, my autograph isn't really worth that much. And, you're not going to be able to resell it on eBay for very much, though. Apparently, people are reselling some of these things. And I tell, and when I sign a baseball, Alex would probably know, signing a baseball is not a natural human undertaking because it's curved and it takes a while to learn how to do it. And since I didn't really learn how to write cursive very well in school because I think that was taught when the Jewish holidays were occurring, and so I wasn't in school in those days. But so I print out my name on the baseballs and I put a date in because I'm a lawyer by training. I always put the date in. People make fun of it, but I don't know. I keep saying, look, you don't really want my autograph. I'm not a player, but people seem to be interested in it. I don't know why.
So
Alex,
David,
can you give him any tips for signing baseballs? Dude, I mean, like, what does he need to be doing here? You've signed a few baseballs.
well, that's one thing I think I have a PhD on. I've signed thousands and thousands of balls. I actually signed about 1,200 just over the last 2 weeks, so my hand is tired. But I think reps. But David, is interesting. We're both fairly new guys to, three incredible leagues. You with MLB baseball and me with the NBA and the W. When you walked into boardrooms for 40, 50 years, when you walk into the boardroom for the first time or first few times, when you have other guys like, you have Jerry Reinsdorf and you have Steve Cohen and Tom Ricketts and so on and so forth, was there any guys you leaned on? And what adjustments have you had to make in that room? Or was it just a natural, just another meeting?
I knew a fair number of the owners before I got involved in baseball from other contexts, but I didn't know them all. And you have to be approved to be an owner, as you know, with the NBA, you have to be approved. So first you have to be approved by the committee chair, and then the entire league. And one of the owners, somebody you know well, was upset with me, and I wasn't sure he was going to approve me because he didn't think I paid enough. He wanted the value of the franchise to be higher, and he thought I had gotten too good a deal. So he kind of said, "You should have paid more." But he eventually he voted to approve me. But it's the people that get to own these teams today are different than they used to be. It used to be the case, to be honest, that the richest people in the United States were not obsessed with buying sports teams. Today, you find a lot of very, very wealthy people buying these sports teams, people who are billionaires and multi-billionaires. If you go back 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years ago, you found uh, business people were buying them that nobody ever heard of. They weren't really well known in the business world. Today, you find people that have achieved something else in the business world or something else in life, and then they're interested in sports teams. It wasn't that case many, many years ago. You go look at the owners of teams in the 1920s and 30s, you wouldn't know who they were. And I pointed out in the book that when the New York Yankees were sold to George Steinbrenner, it wasn't that George Steinbrenner was the big figure he later became. He was a small businessman from Cleveland, Ohio, and he agreed to buy the Yankees in 1972, I think it was, for $8.8 million. But he didn't have $8.8 million. He only had $250,000. And so he syndicated the entire thing. So for $250,000, he bought the New York Yankees. The very wealthy people in those days weren't buying baseball teams. A lot of people were wealthier than George Steinbrenner, but they weren't showing up in those days to buy teams.
So, David, in your estimation, when did that change? Like, when did it become something? You were talking to people. You've watched this. You've watched all sorts of, trends, micro and macro in the investment world. Was there a deal that made you sort of sit up and pay attention, or was it a series of deals? What happened?
Well, I think the private equity and the hedge fund world did explode the net worths of more people than you might have expected. And then when you saw some of the values of these teams, for example, take the LA Dodgers. The LA Dodgers couldn't find a buyer for a long time. Rupert Murdoch bought it years ago. He couldn't stand owning it. He put it up for sale, and he really didn't have that many buyers. And he found somebody who bought it who was a parking lot magnate in Boston. He bought it and it went into bankruptcy. And then they had a hard time finding many people to buy it. A group that did buy it and still owns it wasn't that well known at the time, and they were not the richest group in the United States, and their principals weren't the richest people either. So today, people would say, if I had a chance to buy the LA Dodgers, just tell me the price. But it wasn't the case then.
Yeah. Alex, what did you see? I mean, it's fascinating. You were a Yankee, a well-known one. When did you see it tip? I mean, were you playing when this happened, or like what's your perspective on that tipping point, as it were?
Well, two things have changed drastically, like David said, over the last 20 years. One, you never saw the titans like David of private equity, whether it's Tony Ressler, Jerry Reinsdorf, Steve Schwartzman, John Gray, Henry Kravis, Josh Harris, and David Blitzer. Like that would be the biggest taboo of a person who's running, he or her running a private equity firm, and the responsibilities and the fiduciaries of billions of dollars for your LPs, a lot of them teachers funds, police, CalPERS, all these other stuff. The worst thing they want you to do is have David focus on something else. They want his head on the ball. The other thing that's happened is you never had athletes who could ever afford to buy these franchises. So it's been an incredible paradigm shift in the market. Has been quite interesting. But I do think that is not correlated to the market. The market's flying today, which is good. But it's one that whether it's '08 or pandemic, these teams really never go on sale. And that's a good thing for the sport.
Also, I would say that I was offered the Washington Wizards and the Washington Caps many, many years ago before Ted Leonsis bought it. And I looked at it because a friend of mine was the owner, Abe Poland. And I said, look, Abe, if I do this, my investors are going to say, what the hell are you doing? You're supposed to be managing my money, and you're now worrying about a sports team. So I backed away from it. Ted made a pretty good investment. He paid, under a couple $100 million, I think, for the two teams. And ultimately today, I think it's valued around $7 billion plus the building.
So David, what's
Yeah.
changed? What's changed? I mean, the LP still want a great ROI.
Well, what's changed is that the television contracts are much more valuable than they used to be. That's increased the value of these teams. In addition, you have international money, but you didn't have before. You now have people from overseas willing to invest, and in many cases, they're able to invest. At the recent deal we just saw that did not work out, but my firm was involved in trying to buy the Seattle Seahawks, and the team that we teamed up with had a large foreign investor that was prepared to put up about $3 billion in that deal. Didn't win, but and also the person that won that deal is putting up many billions of dollars. In the old days, you didn't have people could write checks for $1, $2, $3, $4 billion personally. Today, you do have that, and then you also have sovereign wealth funds that are now allowed to invest in some leagues. And as we all know, the NFL has now changed the rules, and they say that private equity firms can buy up to 10%. So this has just increased the values and the competition to buy these sports teams. And I remember when the Glazer family in Florida, which owned the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they bought the Manchester United. I said, what are they doing? Buying a team in England, a soccer team? Who cares about that? I obviously didn't know much about English Premier soccer leagues. Turned out to be a great deal. They paid a couple $100 million for their position, and they sold it recently for an incredible price.
And so, David, one of the things that was so fascinating, and you guys are both sort of circling around this, and I want to go a little bit deeper based on what you did in the book, which is, you press people in a very Rubensteinian way about sort of how they operate these teams. And one of the things I found so interesting, and I think Alex can speak to this, is this idea that everybody's doing it slightly differently. You have some people who would say, I want to be involved in every single decision on the business side and on the basketball side. Like Matt Ishbia essentially said that in his interview with you.
Right.
And then you have other people who are stepping back a little bit, and either they have other jobs that they're tending to, or they have a big portfolio like a Josh Harris where he can't be involved in every single decision for all of the sports teams, maybe just the big ones. What did you make of that? And obviously everybody approaches things differently, but as an owner, what do you take away from that variance?
Well, some people are very detail oriented and they made their money by paying attention to every single detail. Other people are more big picture kind of people and they don't
Mm.
worry about the details, they worry about the bigger picture. And you see that reflected in the personalities. Many of the owners can tell me, to the exact decimal point what their players are making and what their attendance is every single night and every statistic that you can think about in sabermetrics. Other owners are just looking at bigger picture things and really would have no clue as to some of these things. So people bring their own personality. And generally in life, people do what made them successful. They bring it forward. So if you're successful by being a big picture idea kind of guy and have a couple ideas, you're going to manage your team that way. If you're successful by paying attention to details, then you're going to probably do that in your baseball life as well, or your sporting life. I mean, I don't pay attention to what the Canisius are selling for at at Camden Yards, but I suspect some people probably are. I just don't know.
Well, I guess to that point, David and Alex, this is to you too. It must be, and this comes through in some of your interviews, and you captured Tony Ressler in a really nice way, who Alex and I both know, and I know how, if I can say this, I think he would be okay with me saying this, how neurotic he is about his team. I'm a Hawks fan, as Alex knows, I'm an Atlanta guy, and I've watched him, and he just, he is tortured by this team, as we all are a little bit, because they have not had the success on the court that everybody would want them to have. But it must be difficult not to get as deeply involved because, David, you're a winner. Alex, you're a winner. And like you don't actually have as much control over winning and losing as you have in other parts of your life. Is that fair,
Sure.
David?
Well, it's true. Like, for example, in the private equity world, if people are not doing a good job, I can say, well, go do something else, or here's what you should do better. It's hard for me to go into a 21-year-old and 22-year-old and say, look, I'm in my 70s. I was a good player in the Little League when I was 12 years old. Let me tell you what you should do and what you're doing wrong. They're not going to listen. I mean, they're polite. They say hello, hello, Mr. Rubenstein, but they're not really listening to my views on how to baseball. And I just don't. It's hard to relate to them as well. And as Alex probably knows, there are two different schools of thought. Should an owner ever go into the clubhouse and kind of shake hands with the players and congratulate them? Some owners have the view that the clubhouse is the player's private preserve and you just don't go in at all. I usually go in after a game if we won and say hello and thank people and congratulate them. But if we lose, I generally don't think they want to see me at that point, and I generally to try to stay out of their hair, and I don't think they're upset about that. But on the whole, it's every owner does it differently. And Alex, I don't know, do you go into the locker room all the time, or not?
I try not to. I mean, one thing helps that I didn't play basketball. I played baseball, so I know enough to be dangerous. But I also know how holy that space is, and I try to be gracious with it. Like you, if I have some guests in town or some kids, sometimes I pick a fan, a young kid from the crowd, and bring them in, meet them, Anthony Edwards and Rudy Gobert, and maybe give them a ball signed, and that goes a long way. Sometimes I take a ball, and I took this from Jim Dolan, and I told him I would copy it. He gave me the copyrights. Is I'll take a couple balls home and sometimes in the light, when I'm driving home, I'll take two balls and find a couple kids and give it to them. And hopefully they have
Mm.
balls for a lifetime and it makes them a Timberwolves and a Lynx fans forever.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I worked in the White House and I was very young, I would give people a tour of the Oval Office. And people, their jaws drop when you walk them into the Oval Office. The president's not there. You can walk around and so forth. I analogize that to taking people into the clubhouse. They're going into a clubhouse where the players are. They're seeing these players kind of walking around. It's really similar, and they kind of are in awe of it. And it's amazing how people are so impressed with it. And these are just regular humans like anybody else. They're not making decisions that are going to change the world, but the people have an awe of athletes in ways that you might not have expected if you're not in the athletic world.
And to that point, David, what is it? I mean, I know you're so thoughtful about these things, and you're also a deep, deep student of history. What is it about sports that makes it feel so important to us? That makes it so that a fan will come up and want a selfie with you because you are the owner of the team. I mean, with Alex, it's a little more understandable. I am going to gently correct our friend Dave Marchick. It's 696 home runs, just, to set the record straight. Just shy of 700 there, Alex. But
The fifth highest in history.
and so that is. Although, Alex, do you want to tell your favorite stat?
No.
The counter. Can I say it?
What?
Sure.
What is it? What is it?
His favorite stat is not 696. It's not his favorite, but it's the one that he very, with a lot of humility, points out that he has the fifth most strikeouts in the history of baseball in all time. Alex Rodriguez struck out the fifth most time of anybody, which sort of shows you the nature of baseball.
Well,
But
Jason, I don't know if David's good at math, so let me tell him. That means only 4 people in the history of mankind have struck out more than me. So I have a PhD in failing.
Yeah, but are they in the Hall of Fame?
Neither am I.
someday, someday,
Probably.
someday.
So
So
let me ask you, today, I would say that to answer your question, when boys, I can speak for boys better than I can speak for girls, but obviously it's changed. When boys are little, they play sports. And then they realize at a certain age, you come to the realization you're not quite good enough to get to the next level. And in my case, it was probably about age 7 or 8. But some people, it's a little bit older. I peaked as an athlete probably at 8 or 9. And then, I realized that being in a Jewish Little League was not going to lead me to be on a Sandy Koufax or something. But boys have this love of sports and activities, and they're trained to love it. And then when you get to be an adult, you realize you're not as good as other people, and you go and do other things that in your career, but you still have a love of something that you wanted to do when you were younger, and you appreciate what people who did much better than you have done in their lives, becoming professional athletes.
yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, there's also, and I think, David, you've seen this in Baltimore. Alex, I dare say you've seen this in New York, obviously. You've seen it growing up in Miami. You've seen it in every ballpark. One interesting side note is you're going back this weekend to Seattle for the 50th anniversary of that franchise, being honored as one of the 50 best players in that team's history. We were talking on our show, which will drop on Thursday's latest episode of the deal, about that aspect of a community's connection to its team. And David, I do think there is something, Baltimore is a city that has certainly been through it, as they say, but the Orioles are this
Well,
constant that really unites the city, right?
Well, it does for this reason. Baltimore, as a city, when I grew up, it was the ninth biggest city in the United States. Now it's not in the top 20. It's had enormous amount of flight out of the city. The major headquarters have gone. There are very few things that are constant in Baltimore. It has some great virtues, of course. Johns Hopkins University, Johns Hopkins Hospital, other great things are in Baltimore. But as a place to be proud of, there have been a lot of challenges in Baltimore. And Baltimore's always said, well, Philadelphia is more historic than we are, and Boston has greater universities than we do, and New York is more financially successful. So when Baltimore can beat the other teams and other cities, it really means more to them. If the New York
Mm.
Yankees win, it's great. But if the New York Yankees don't win or the Mets don't win, people in New York are not going to suffer quite as much as if Baltimore gets close and doesn't win. It means much more to Baltimore because they don't have as many other things, in my view, to going for them as New York or Boston or Chicago. And so in Baltimore, it's been. And I remember the team has been around for quite a while historically. They were in the original American League, then they got out. They came back in 1954. And when I was a senior in high school, they won the World Series the first time, 1966, when Frank Robinson was said to be an old 30 years old. He was traded to the Baltimore Orioles, and he then won the Triple Crown. Um,
Yeah. Well,
So,
yeah, noted baseball historian Alex Rodriguez knows that stuff backwards and forwards, right, Alex?
I do. And look, Baltimore has one of the richest history in our sport. And going back to Frank Robinson, also, obviously Cal Ripken, Cal's dad, the great pitchers you had there in the 70s. It was awesome. But David, after all the conversations that you had for this book, what do you think separates the truly great owners from everyone else?
The truly great owners. The truly great owners, in my view, don't pay as much attention to the bottom line financially. They're more focused on what can I do to win, and they're not worried about $1 million here or there. They want to win. They want to do it as a matter of civic pride, and they want to basically feel that they've delivered something for the town which they're representing. And I think that's what really makes baseball ownership or football ownership or basketball ownership different. You want to make money, you don't want to lose money. But as you know, most teams in baseball don't make money on an operating basis. Why do people want to buy these teams at prices that seem high? Because they really think they can turn it around and they figure they'll make money when they sell it. But it's not pleasant to lose money every year and then wait to the sale to actually make money, which is what happens with a lot of baseball teams. Obviously, basketball and football are somewhat different in that respect. But I think people who really are great owners are people that are obsessed with winning. They want to do whatever it takes to win, and they want to do it for the city and for the pride involved, and not so much because they're going to make a little bit more money.
Jerry Reinsdorf, a longtime mentor who owns uh, the Chicago Bulls and the White Sox. He has 7 championships, 6 with Michael and 1 in 2005, I believe. He gave me the great advice, the rule of 5. And I started talking about my dreams about one day being part owner of a team. And 20 years ago or so, he told me, Alex, is the rule of 5. When you own a team, you want to either lose 5, break even, or make 5. If you stay in that bucket and you hold it for 20, 30 years, you should do quite well.
Well,
Mm.
he has done well. He paid a couple $1 million, I think, for the Chicago Bulls, and today, obviously, it's worth many, many billions of dollars. And the White Sox, he's agreed to sell control at a price staggeringly higher than I think he paid under $10 million or so, something like that, for the White Sox when he bought it many, many, many years ago. So he's done a great job, and at the age of 90, he's still going strong.
He
I'm
paid 19 for one team and 16 for the Bulls.
Okay, okay. So, I hope that the role model that for me is that if you're involved in sports, you live longer. And so he's 90 years old and going strong. I'm hoping the same thing will rub off on me.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, sports keeps us all young. One thing that I want to talk about, and we're going to get to Q&A in a little bit from the audience, is because I think Alex and I were both fascinated by this, and Alex obviously has the experience of going into this deal for the Timberwolves and Lynx with a partner. David, tell us the story. This is a very business savvy audience that we're talking to, of you and Mike Arrighetti, sort of coming together on this deal,
Right,
because I think it's a great story. And Mike Arrighetti has become,
right.
someone we both admire, we all admire, and a real powerful force in the
Right.
finance business and now in baseball.
Yeah, let me describe what happened. I didn't know Mike Arrighetti. He called me one day and said, "I heard you were thinking of buying the Orioles." I said, "Well, I was thinking about it, but that's not going to happen. And if it happens, I'll let you know." And then it went away. And then about 9 months later, when the deal happened, was getting ready to happen, I called him and said, "Remember me? You called me and said you were interested. Well, now the deal might happen." I didn't. I'd never met him before, physically, and so we agreed to meet in a West Side delicatessen, and we talked about it. And it was perfect for me because he knows a lot more about baseball than I do. He really knows baseball. He played high school baseball. He knows every statistic about baseball. He's followed this is his life. He loves baseball. But as a businessman, what he did is staggering. He was a founding partner of Aries. Aries was really started by Tony Ressler. Tony left to buy the Hawks, and he's still a chairman and biggest shareholder. But at the time he left, the market value of Aries was roughly, I think, about $1.8 billion. Today, I think it's about $45 billion. It was as high as $60 billion. And Mike Arrighetti has done an incredible job of building that firm into probably the leading private credit firm in the world. And he's done this while he's also very involved in sports. He's built a golf course. He has a baseball team now. And, he's a very talented guy and very smart person. So, it came about fortuitously. Normally, you wouldn't go into business this kind of way with somebody you really didn't know, but I didn't really know him. But I did so much checking on him. Everybody said the same thing. He's a really smart guy. He knows a lot more about baseball than you do, and you're lucky to get him.
He's a good human being too. I can see how you guys get along. He's an amazing guy. Alex, I would love for you to come in here and talk about your partnership with Mark Lowry, because you guys were not, you came together for sports as well. It's not totally dissimilar, I think, to what David's describing, right?
Well, I think there's a lot of similarities and many differences. I mean, for one, Mark Lowry is a lot smarter than I am. He's a lot richer. He comes from the world of e-commerce, where he's one of the top people in the world. When a few years ago, when Walmart bought his last starters called Jet.com, from the time he built a deck to the time he closed with Walmart was less than 24 months for 3.3 billion. And when I asked Rob Walton about it, Rob Walton, who obviously is from the Sam Walton family, who owns Walmart, he said we acquired the business for probably $1.5 billion. We acquired Mark for $1 billion, the balance. And he took that business in a short time, in less than 4 years, from $8 billion in e-commerce sales to over 50. Today that number's over 100, and they've kept most of Mark Lowry's team. So it was a great buy for Walmart, and we have complementary set of skills like David and Mike do, and we lean on each other. And we become really like brothers, and we have never had one argument. If there's a debate, we flip a coin, and we whoever has the most conviction, we go with that.
Mike also has, in my case, an advantage. He goes to the west side of New York and goes into a batting cage once a week. There's some batting cage. I guess you can go in if you're a regular citizen, and he's actually good. So as you probably know, Alex, when you have spring training, sometimes you get owners to coming down and they want to kibitz and so when we have our ownership group come down, we put them in a batting cage and let them hit the ball. And it's a sad sight to see 50 and 60-year-old men trying to hit a ball thinking that they were, 15 or 16 again. It's a sad sight, and we try not to laugh at each other when we're doing this. But Mike is actually pretty good at it.
That's
How
great.
good are you at basketball, Alex?
Not good. Not good. I played a little bit in high school. I had my realization when I was 12, 13 years old that Dominican guys cannot run private equity groups. So I really focused on sports and baseball. But I'm a wannabe basketball player, but I'm not that good.
And so, David, one of the things that's interesting in the book is, you do have a number of different people who, as I said earlier, have taken different approaches. You've got some multi-team owners, either across a single sport, like Michelle Kang, who's there in Washington. You have Josh Harris, obviously, who's across just about every major sport in partnership with David Blitzer, who is literally across every single sport. What is your ambition when it comes to sports? Or are you thinking that maybe you want a portfolio of these,
Uh,
or is this a one and done?
well, if I were 30 years old or 40 years old or 50 years old, I might be thinking about doing more. But right now, I would just want to do one good thing for Baltimore, which is to help the team do better. So at my age, I probably am not going to buy a whole bunch of other teams. I've looked at them. People come to me all the time now with things other than the major sports. There's some sports I didn't even know existed that they now have. That people are telling me I should be in padel. I should be in in paddle court. Uh,
Pickleball. Pickleball. Pickleball.
pickleball, pickleball. I should be in beach volleyball. I should be in all these sports. I mean, and everybody's thinking that one of these sports is going to take off and make a lot of money. Women's ice hockey. I mean, there's so many sports I didn't even know existed, and everybody thinks they're gonna make a lot of money. I would point out Josh Harris when he bought the Philadelphia 76ers. I said, how's he going to do that? And he also committed to go to all the home games or something like that. And I said, how's he going to do that while he's in the private equity world? But he managed to pull it off. And now he's built with David Blitzer an incredible empire. And his business career is still done well. So I don't know. I guess sometimes if you're successful at some things, you can be successful at other things as well. You just have some skill sets. And I haven't yet been as successful in sports as I would like to be. But hope springs eternal.
Yeah, it is interesting. I have to say, David, I've known you for a long time. It's amazing to see how intensely engaged in this you are. I mean, have you surprised even yourself?
I have. I'm surprised. I mean, look, I didn't go to that many baseball games until I did this. Now I'm going to baseball games. I'm paying attention to statistics, and people are walking up to me on the streets in Baltimore and saying, "Hey, your player's not doing well. Why don't you get this pitcher? Why don't you trade this one?" I mean, literally, I'm surprised about it. But you get to relive your youth a little bit. So maybe it's making me a little younger. I don't know, but I enjoy it. I don't have any regrets about doing it. I just wish I could. Look, to be honest, here's what happened. I bought a team that was heavily criticized by some for not putting enough money in. Okay. So the team was in first place in the American League East when I bought it, the year before I bought it. I've now taken them to last place. So I put in a lot of money. I've tripled with Mike Arrogant, I have tripled the salaries, yet we went from first place to last place. So, it's a little frustrating and embarrassing. I'm really embarrassed about it. I'm trying to do what I can to fix it and turn it around. And we'll see. I hope when my obituary is written, they will say World Series champion rather than Carlyle co-founder as the headline. But at this point, I'm not sure it'll get that way.
Well, the good news for you, David, as someone who's looking at this from the outside, is there's always the Mets, and I mean, they because their payroll's even substantially bigger. Alex, what else you got before we move to the last? I don't want to box you out here in basketball
That's
terms.
I think my last one, David, is just you grew up modestly and now you own this team and you've done all these wonderful things. Uh, what has this done for your family? Is this something that brings happiness to you? Is this something that makes you, Jerry Reinsdorf once told me you can get old but never grow up. And I think you as an owner, I think this helps because you get to enjoy the finer parts of what sports does for us, and music is bring people together. One of the few instruments in life that still brings us together.
Look, when I didn't have as many friends as I now have. I call people up and say, "You want to come to a baseball game? You want to go to the clubhouse? You want to sit in the this owner's box?" People would do it. When I was chairman of the Kennedy Center, people weren't dying to go to the Kennedy Center as much as I thought they should. Now people want to go to baseball games, and they're calling me up all the time saying, can I go to the clubhouse? Can I be in the batting cage?" And it's really good for children when you can take the children of your friends and young kids and get them to see a player and get them to get to sign an autograph, and it really brings happiness to people. And what's life all about but the pursuit of happiness, as Thomas Jefferson said. So happiness is really brought about to some extent by sports, even if you're not winning all the time. So I'm happy I did it. I just want to do a little bit better than we've done so far, and hopefully we will.
And so, David, as you went through and you looked at who you interviewed in the book, and it's really such a great cross section of ownership and stories, and as I said earlier, very different approaches. Who do you admire who's not in the book? Like, who have you sort of modeled yourself after? Who maybe just you haven't interviewed yet, and obviously you have a great platform to keep interviewing people. But who's on your list?
Well, I did interview Josh Harris, and then I have not interviewed David Blitzer, who was his partner, and they've done a really good job working together. In most cases, they're together. I think they've done a really good job, and and take a look at. I didn't interview the owner of the Los Angeles Dodgers, and look what he's done. He bought the team, and they made it into the team that won the World Series twice. Some controversy there for sure, but I have not interviewed. He doesn't do very many interviews, I think. So, I'm always looking for more people to interview, and also in different sports. Like Michelle Kang is somebody that may not be as well known to people. She's on the University of Chicago board with me, but she sold her company, which she built from scratch, and then she put a lot of the money into building women's soccer teams or buying women's soccer teams and transforming the sport a bit. And she's really, really well respected in the women's sports world now for other things she's done as well. But I should
All
tell
right.
everybody that I actually knew Jason's father before I knew Jason. Jason's father was the head of the National Zoo. And one day he came to the Smithsonian board meeting, which owns the National Zoo, and said, "We're going to lose our pandas if we don't get some money because whoever the sponsor was pulling out." And so I got to know his father, and I got involved with pandas that way. And now more people ask me about pandas than they even ask me about baseball sometimes.
That
David,
is a
please tell
good
me that his father, who I know well, is a much nicer guy than Jason.
He's
probably
got
true.
more hair.
He's got
but
great
but
parents.
very 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 thin, very thin. It's a thin margin. All right,
All right, I'm
Marchick, over
back.
to you.
Thank you very much. This is a great conversation. We have
Thank
a
you.
bunch of call questions. So first one comes from our friend Ambassador Stuart Bernstein, which is, why are football team valuations so much higher than baseball and basketball?
Well, the reason is that the most watched sport in television is football. Of the 100 most watched shows in any given year right now, television shows, about 95 of them are professional football, NFL games. So, and that produces a lot more revenue. In addition, there is some people would say there's a salary cap in football, and there's a salary cap in basketball. There is no salary cap in baseball, and that some people would say that's a factor as well. But generally, the popularity of the NFL and the NBA is just staggering compared to what it was 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah,
Okay, we have a question. Go ahead, Alex, please.
I just want to add to that. I mean, I think anytime you value buying a business, right, you want to know about two things. What are the revenues and the revenue forecast, and what are your expenses forecast? And when you can't forecast what your expenses are going to be because there is no ceiling, that becomes a very dangerous business to invest in. And then the multiples suffer. So as an example, NFL, NBA, NHL, they might go for 10, 12, 13 times multiple. And a baseball team that has a lot of uncertainty around it, especially with the CBA ahead of us, which it ends on December 1st, the lockout, then those multiples can go as low as 4, 5, or 6. But I've always said that the best time to invest in baseball is if I had the capital, I would be going all in baseball right now because my bet's going to be that after the CBA, the world's going to be better, not worse.
Uh, from your lips to God's ears. Yes, I
Yeah.
hope so.
We have a question. We have a program at American University in our business school that prepares people to be in the business of sports, to go work for sports teams. And one of our the professor that leads it, Matt Bakovich, is with about 100 students watching. And the question was, if a student is coming into your organization, this could be for Alex or David, what can they do to be noticed and distinguish themselves when you have, 1,000 applicants for every job in a professional sports team?
Well, I would say if you mean to get the job or when you have the job.
Once you get it, you get an
When you get the
internship
job.
or a
Um,
job. Like how do you get noticed and how do you prove yourself
okay.
indispensable?
Don't work 9 to 5. Work longer hours. Think of projects that other people didn't ask you to do, but that might be valuable. Um, Try to get mentors who can help you and will help mentor you, and make it clear to people that this is your career ambition, and this is something you really want to do, rather than go into something more important like private equity.
Yeah, I like that. And I think, David, from my point of view, I think, like David said, be the first one in, last one to go home. You realize in those early hours that the CEO usually gets in first. And if you and him are the only one in the building, he might say, "Hey, Alex, go get some coffee," and you run there and you get some muffins and you go. And really, attitude determines altitude. So that's one. I think being humble, present, building incredible relationships. And I like those stories that, someone like a CEO like, David Rubenstein, who's admired by so many. I like stories when they started in a janitor, right? And they work themselves up. To me, that's my equivalent of I started in the minor leagues and now I'm into ownership. So I've seen every part of the cap stack when it comes to the way up. So humility is very important. Relationships are even more important.
So question for Jason and Alex. David Rubenstein mentioned, all these other sports which are now gaining popularity, women's volleyball, padel, et cetera. They're on TV. Which of these do you see as providing the greatest upside opportunity from both investor perspective, but also from a media perspective, which, in 5 years or 10 years, everybody's going to be watching?
I would say on a more macro level, it's women's sports kind of writ large. I mean, I think that is almost undeniable, in part because there's so much room to grow. So I think that would be my base case answer. I think going down a level, it was interesting. There's an interesting answer that Michelle Kang gives to David in about sort of this answer of like, where would you invest? Um, and she basically says, if everybody says it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, it may be too late to really get the like really true alpha type returns. Um, I've been fascinated by volleyball. I don't know whether anybody's gotten it fully right, and there are a couple different competing aspects of it. But there's very strong youth. It's very, very strong at the college level, and so that's definitely an area that I would keep my eye on. The other thing that I would say briefly is, and Michelle Kang talked about this as well. That was one, David, for what it's worth, that was one of, I thought, my favorite interviews in the entire book. I thought she just laid out the case very, very well. But one of the things that she was saying is, and this actually goes to the sort of working piece of it too, that working in sports is not just working for a team. Like that's a very, very limited number of jobs. And I think one of the things that both David and Alex have seen, and Alex has really put his money where his mouth is on this, is these are huge ecosystems. And so that is both investment opportunity and job opportunity going forward, because this is an industry. It's a multifaceted industry that's only getting bigger and bigger. And so I think if you're investing, think about investing in the aspects that aren't necessarily just the teams.
The sports adjacent industries may be growing faster than the sports industry.
Exactly.
Alex, did you have a comment?
That's true. I mean, let me just interrupt and say that the things like industries that provide merchandise, they're growing at very rapid rates because people want to buy merchandise at levels that you never anticipated. And I agree on women's sports. The women's the Liberty, the New York Liberty, was bought by Joe Tsai and his wife for roughly $10 million a few years ago. They just did a revaluation of it, or raising new capital. I think at about a $600 million valuation, 60 times higher. So I think women's sports, while they haven't yet been profitable, is probably going to change in the next 5-6 years in terms of profitability.
Yeah, Steve Greenberg, probably the most, from Allen Company. He's probably the top investment banker in the world when it comes to sports. He's probably done over 100 transactions. He said it best when he said, every owner that I've sold a team to, they say they paid too much. And then I call him 5 years later and say, hey, I'll pay you a 20%, vig on that. And everyone, he's over 100. Like nobody wants to sell it. And when you realize with these sports, and Jerry Reinsdorf has owned the Bulls and the White Sox since 81 and 84, the longer you hold them, the better you do. And, when David Tepper bought North Carolina for about $2.2 billion and Dodgers, everyone thought they overpaid, and now it looks like a master, two beautiful deals. The last thing I would say is I think the WNBA and women's sports, to both Jason and David's points, are the best. My daughters always ask, what's the difference between the NBA team and the W? And I say it this way. I say, think about the WNBA hypergrowth. It's like when Meta went IPO. And the NBA today is like where Meta is today. It's just a different, growth of scale. But W has this, and I'll give you some stats just to back it up. I used to do ESPN Sunday Night Baseball for a number of years with my partner, Matt Vasgersian. And on good nights on Sundays, we would do 1.5 to 2 million. Well, we just did, we had a game last night against Kaylin Clark and the Fever, Indiana Fever, 12 o'clock game here, 1 o'clock East Coast on ESPN. And we drew around 2 million viewers. Now, to put that in some context around that, so what you're telling me is MLB baseball gets like, say, 15 or 20 times more revenue for their rights, and W only has 1.5 to 2 million, and they get like for 5% or 10%. So if you think about where that train is going, there's a huge arb. And I really think that WNBA is still in the very, very early days. And in 5 or 7 years, I don't think you'll be able to believe what these franchises are worth.
Michelle Kang's investment may be the best investment in any of the sports teams that you wrote about, because her multiple invested capital has exploded in a very short time. So, Alex, the deals you talked about, many of them took 2-3 decades to develop. Her valuation has gone up, extraordinarily in just a few years. It's amazing.
It was like everything else, right? Like the Lakers traded for 10 billion. You saw the number. I saw a number Golden State limited partner piece for about 11 billion, and you saw the number of the Seahawks for a little bit south of 10 billion, which Carlyle Davis Company was involved in and came up short. But the more risk you take, the more ROI you have, right? And those are not considered risky investments because you have great brands like the NFL. The Lakers are obviously different, so that was a risk, and it paid off beautifully.
I think if you want to invest in sports, you really have to like sports too. If you do it only to make money, I think you're not going to get as much pleasure out of it. You may not just make money. You should really like sports, and if you don't like sports, find another thing to invest in. That's my view.
David, you've written a number of books on different sectors about being the best investors, about great historians. There's a question about what are the characteristics that run throughout these stories that you covered um, that are associated with being a great sports owner or leader of a sports team. And Alex, I wonder if you might add your own views from your time being a player and also now being an owner. So, David, do you want to start?
Yeah, if you're going to be a leader, if you want to be a leader, and not everybody wants to be a leader, some people want to be followers. If you want to be a leader and actually accomplish something, learn how to persuade people of what you want to do. All of life is really about persuading people, your parents, your children, your spouse, whatever it might be, your business partner. Persuade. Learn how to persuade somebody to follow you and to do what you want to do. And you do that by learning how to speak reasonably well, learning how to, you don't have to be Martin Luther King at the Lincoln Memorial, but learn how to speak well or learn how to write well so you can convince people. You don't have to be Abraham Lincoln writing the Gettysburg Address, but learn how to write reasonably well or learn how to, most importantly, lead by example. If you want people to follow you, do what you want them to do, and people will follow you.
Yeah, David, if you don't mind repeating the question because you cut off a little bit.
Sure. The question is, what are the characteristics that make a great owner of a sports team or leader of a sports team?
Yeah, I was very, very blessed to have played for three great ownership groups. George Steinbrenner jumps off the page. Obviously, he's bigger than life, but he considered what his motto was VCP, right? He had the big vision, V's for vision, and he was clear about it, and he would articulate it very clearly. The C is the capital. He said, "I'm going to deploy the capital to make my vision come true." And then the hardest one that we all know is people. You got to go out and hire the best people in the world and make them sing and let them sing and dance, right? But I think the three qualities is be really, really good at what you do, be a black belt communicator. I mean, you can't do anything without persuasion or communicating. That's what Warren Buffett taught me, and he's been my mentor for over 25 years. And then integrity, integrity never takes a holiday. And I think it's what you do every day, say what you do and do what you say. And over time, you play the long run. You're not going to win every year, but if you're making commitments to the community, to your franchise, and you're being a role model, I think in the long run, you'll be known as a good owner.
And Jason, you've written for 20 years about the leaders in finance and also the leaders in sports ownership and across all industries and sports adjacent. Are there some characteristics that you see that flow across great leaders in finance and also the best leaders in the sports business?
I mean, I would build on what David said in an answer to where to invest in sports. I mean, the consistency is every there has never been a leader or a CEO who I've interviewed who I ever got the sense not just didn't like the job, but didn't love the job. Like really, and David Rubenstein's a great example of that. Like he thrives on all that he's doing. I see how Alex has grown into being an owner. Like I've sort of watched him as we've been friends go through this journey, and he is like both of these guys who I'm very pleased to be on this panel with are deeply curious, deeply inquisitive, deeply engaged. And the best leaders, and Alex sort of alluded to this when he talked about the CEO's the first one in. The CEO's all in. So the best leaders are all in, and it, and they communicate it, and they have a passion for it that is palpable, and that is without question the main consistency across all those people.
There's a question from our women's basketball coach, Kelly Killian, about the biggest investments you've made associated with your ownership that's not financially based, meaning where have you allocated money or resources or time that was not focused on a financial return?
Well, what we did is we rebuilt the business unit. In other words, we when we took over, there were very few people in the business side of the organization, and we went out and redid the whole business side of the organization. And you could say that I don't know if it's financial or not, but we did it because we just didn't think we had done enough. And also in the community, we built a new foundation. We've hired a new person to run our foundation, and we want to be more actively involved in the community and giving away money to the community is something that's been important to the owners of the team, but also to the community itself.
Yeah, I would say echo exactly what David said on the business side. We've kind of ramped up that pretty well where we have it in a good place. We still have a long ways to go, but that's been great. And then improvements around Target or Arena, both in the locker room, lounges, different entertainment spots, innovative around some of our companies that have been helping with tickets in the e-commerce space, which Mark Laurie has driven that part. And then I would say from just a human capital, which I think, are the scarcity of what we have that is the most valuable is our time. And I bought a house here. I'm in my home in Minnesota. We had a breakfast this morning, have a dinner tonight, and I do this around the clock. And I go to most home games, and then I travel with the team on the playoffs. So I think just being here, away from my family, spending time in Minnesota, and then showing face in this community and showing up a lot of community stuff is things that's very, very helpful. And also recruiting is where I spend most of my time for both teams.
Yeah, remember what Woody Allen famously said, 80% of life is showing up. And when you're an owner, if you show up and you show to the games, people notice. If you don't go to the games, people notice. And I think being very visible is really an important thing for an owner.
Last question, and maybe Alex, maybe you could start, is how you manage the role of a sports team in societal issues. So, for example, the George Floyd murder occurred in Minnesota. There was, it was a terrible event, but it led to a lot of socially conscious speaking out by athletes. We now are kind of at the other end of the pendulum where kind of that's frowned upon by certain people. So how do you manage that, and what's your role as a team owner when things in society are greater than the sport?
Yeah, I think whether you're owner or governor or a leader of any sort, I think one of the most important characteristics is empathy and compassion. And one things we don't do is get into politics, but we want to bring people together. In many ways, the emotional engine of a city becomes the teams in the city, right? That's the one thing that drives you every day. And I see people come into better moods to work the next day when your team wins. So I think we have great people that do that. We have a PR department that helps us with putting out comments that are going to be helpful and constructive. But the George Floyd was a very painful moment here. Obviously, what happened here with ICE was also a very troubling situation, and we try to support, we try to bring help, and hopefully help people get past their painful times.
Well, we have sadly come to the end. This has been a wonderful conversation. Jason Kelly, thank you. Congrats on your new role, and look forward to your next book. Alex
Thank you.
Rodriguez, thank you very much for everything you've done for the country and now as a business leader. And David Rubenstein,
Thank you.
I feel like you need to work harder, and you could have done more than 8 books. So,
okay. Thanks a lot, David. Thanks a
okay,
lot.
and this will be out in the bookstores in the next 2 weeks. So
Correct.
thanks
Thank
very
you.
much. Okay.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye-bye.